Hello, everyone. My name is Sam, and I'm with the customer success team here at BigTime. And today's webinar will focus on invoicing. We'll walk through the entire invoicing workflow, starting with creating the invoice from work in progress, going over creating custom invoice templates, as well as some of the functionality with posting your invoices over to QuickBooks as well. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a box from the GoToWebinar application where you can send in live questions. We do have a success rep, Brandon, who will be fielding questions in real time. Although if we don't get to your question on the webinar, definitely feel free to send in a support ticket to support@bigtime.net. We do have support reps standing by currently. All right, let's go ahead and in my site, I'm going to jump to the invoicing overview. So starting here, you have a view of your current work in progress, which is just all unbilled time and expenses, your draft invoices, your finals, which are invoices that have been sent, posted, or paid for the current month, and your AR aging, which is just all open invoices. Down below, you can see a summary of your invoicing from the last 12 months. And you can also hover over an individual month and see the total invoiced amount and how much of that has been paid. So you can see here, for example, December of 2018, we invoiced $39,250, and that total amount has been paid and closed. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with looking at the WIP here. So this is all unbilled time and expenses. If you want to filter by date, for example, you can click up in the top right into the advanced filters and select a date range. So let's just say we want to see WIP from February through March, for example. You can also filter by client type, invoice type, which will be based on the last invoice that you've created for a given client, and team lead on a given client or project, depending on the verbiage in your site. And lastly, here you can also choose to only show time or expenses that have been approved. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply this date filter. Okay, so from here, you can invoice the full amount, or you can click into the fees here and invoice specific time or expense entries by checking the box on the left and then hitting create invoice. From here, you can also edit the entries before you create the invoice and edit the billing rates as well up here in the top left. For our purposes, let's say we're just going to create a T&M invoice for one of our clients here. I'll just go ahead and click into the WIP amount all the way on the right and click create invoice and choose time and materials. You could also check the box on the left and then hit bulk create invoices. This is just a different way to create a single invoice. Okay, so before we finalize, we have a few options to select. On the left-hand side, we can change the billing rate type that's being used. We can change that date range. We already have a date filter applied from the WIP, so that transfers over to the actual invoice. You can change what you're subtotaling by on the invoice. Right now, we're subtotaling by staffer and billing rate. One important note here, if you are looking to track what you're invoicing against fee budgets that you set up at the task level, you have to make sure to subtotal by task or task and rate. In your site, that verbiage might be different. You might have phases or matters or engagements instead of tasks, but that would be whatever unit of work you're breaking your project out into. Okay, so I'll just change that to subtotal by task. You can see those line items changed on the right. You can enter an invoice note You can choose to include only approved time, only approved expenses, and also to populate the line item notes with your task notes if you have any of those entered. Here on the right, you can change the line item amount. So if I wanted to just change this to 500, you can also add additional line items. One use case for this would be if you wanted to include a discount, you can just put a negative amount and then that will do the math for you, take it off the total. I'm going to go ahead and hit finalize down below. So now we've got a draft invoice. From this page here, you can click into any of your line items to edit the text. You can also add a note here. This would be the line item note. And you can click and drag the left-hand side next to each of these line items to rearrange the order. Here you can mark a given line as being taxable, and then down below you'd have your tax rates. So these tax rates will import in from your QuickBooks file if you have them set up. Otherwise, if you're not using QuickBooks, we can import those tax rates for you on the back end. If you click the red triangle next to amounts, you can change what displays here. So if you want to see the quantity, rate, and amount, the description only, sales tax info, where you mark the line item as being taxable or not, or what these line items are actually linking to in QuickBooks. On the right-hand side, you've got your invoice number. So I've got an invoice auto numbering system set up, and you can set that up from Invoicing configure. In the defaults, so my format here is year dash and then 4 sequential digits. So 19-0001, 0002, and so on. You have the same options here for your invoice auto numbering that you have for your project auto numbering. And you can choose the next ID in the series here on the right. Below, you can also lock your billing rates on or before a given date. And that would be if you wanted to update your billing rates for a certain date range, but lock the rates in prior to a given date. Okay. You can also pick up unbilled time and expenses right below the invoice number. And what that would do is, let's say if we created this invoice and afterwards more time or expenses were logged to this client, and we wanted to just pull those time and expenses onto this invoice instead of creating a separate one, we can click pick up unbilled time and expenses, select the date range that they were logged, and that would all get pulled onto the current invoice. PO number, if you have PO numbers that you use for your clients, I'm just going to jump to my client list here. One tip regarding that field, from the client list, if you add a custom field all the way at the bottom and call it PO number, the number that you enter here will auto-populate on any invoices that you create for this client. Otherwise, you can leave it blank. If you don't have PO numbers and on your actual invoice template, you can just choose to not display that field. So it's not just a blank space on the PDF. Terms, these import in from QuickBooks, and you can also edit them by clicking into the dropdown and hitting edit these values. From here, you can also set a default set of terms. So for me, I have net 30 days out for payment. And I set that as the default by checking this box. Status, this will automatically update as you move along the invoicing workflow. So right now we've just finalized the invoice, so it's drafted. Once the invoice has been sent to the client, that will automatically update. If you're posting to QuickBooks, it'll change to posted. And if you're utilizing the invoice review and approval structure as the invoice is approved or rejected or under review, those statuses will automatically apply. You've got your draft date, your sent date, which is the date the email has been sent out of BigTime to the client, and your due date, which is based on your terms. So automatically the due date for me was set to 30 days out from the draft date. You can also click into any of these fields to change them manually. Down below in the activity feed, you can see when the invoice was created and if any changes have been made, and also payment history as well. Up top, if you click the triangle next to the client name, you can see your billing contact information. So you can see that for this client, I don't have any billing contacts in the system. So what I can do is click edit address / contact information. And I can actually add the billing contact from here instead of navigating all the way back to the client list. So I'll just go ahead and just add one of my colleagues' information here so you can see how this looks on the actual invoice. And I'll make sure to mark him as the billing contact as well. Okay. In the time tab here, you'll see the time entries that have been pulled onto this invoice. From here, you can edit them by clicking into the fee amount. So you can write up or write down individual entries and also add revision notes as far as what you changed. You can drop these entries back into the WIP as well, so you can invoice them later. One word of caution here, if you do hit delete, that will delete the entries from your site entirely, not just from the invoice. So this is something to be aware of. Add time will add a new time entry. And update rates will update your billing rates just for your time entries on this invoice, as opposed to all of your time entries. Jumping to the preview tab, this is where you can see the print preview of what your invoice will actually look like when it's sent to the client or printed in PDF format. So here I've got a template that I've created for my T&M clients. I've got each task line item broken out, quantity, rate, and amount. I've got a footer, which lets the client know 10% interest will be accrued to payments that are past due. And then I've got the actual time and expense detail broken out on the next few pages. From here, you can also add additional documents on the right. So currently, the only file type that we support for that are PDFs, but there's more to come with that feature. And you can also forward your invoice to the review and approval process if you have that set up, which we'll take a look at as well. But right now, let's take a look at how I actually created this custom invoice template. So navigating to Invoicing, Configure, in the PDF Styles tab, and also from this page, this is where you can upload your logo if you want that displayed on your invoice PDF. Here, you've got your pre-made BigTime templates, such as invoice line items, your summary only, time and expense detail only, and detailed multi-page time and expense. But you can also create a brand new template. So this BigTime T&M template that we just took a look at, from here, you can set up your invoice header on this template. You can choose to show your logo. You can also choose where your logo shows in relation to your address block. You can choose to show the client billing address and the billing contact name. The overall note will show any default invoice notes that you have entered here from your client list, or any invoice notes that you have entered on the actual invoice. You can choose which fields will show in the top right corner of your header. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have a template that includes PO number for your clients, where you have a PO number, and you can have another template where you're not showing this field. For appearance, if you print out your invoices physically, you can set an envelope format. You can change the font size, and also the color scheme. One cool feature about this color scheme option is it can auto match the colors on your template to match your logo colors. So here we've got the BigTime colors. So we can say, let's say the font color we want is red, and that'll just be for the subtotal colors, and the highlight can be gray, let's say, and the lines can be black. You can add a footer at the bottom of your first page or at the bottom of every page. One tip here, if you have a multi-page invoice where you're breaking out your time and expenses in detail, this entry here, $ lowercase p of $ capital P, this tells the system to number your pages. So that'll include page numbers at the bottom of each page on your PDF. Then lastly here in this third section, this is where you control the actual level of detail that you're showing the client. So line items here, this first page is just the invoice summary page. So looking back at the invoice, what that translates to is this here. So this is where you break out each of your line items depending on what you're subtotaling by. So as we looked at earlier, I subtotaled by task. So each of my line items is just the task name and also my discount line item as well. You can choose to not show this page. I know some of our clients prefer just to jump straight into showing the time and expense detail. So if that's the case, you can just uncheck include line items and only show time detail or time and expense detail. You can change the header of this section. You can choose to show unpaid invoices, which would be all open invoices for this client, and overall totals for the unpaid invoices as well. For time and expenses, this is just where you choose which fields to show on your time detail portion of the invoice. So you can see here, I'm showing my staffer's name, the date of the time entry, which task the time is logged to, any notes that they've entered on their timesheet, the quantity of hours, the billing rate, and the total amount. You can then choose what to sort by. So I'm sorting by staffer name alphabetically, descending. You can choose to exclude non-billable entries to only show a summary instead of each individual time entry. And you can also choose what you're subtotaling by. In the budget status section, this applies more to your fixed fee invoices. So we'll take a look at that once we take a look at fixed fee invoicing. And receipts, if you send copies of your receipts to your clients with your invoice, this is where you can choose that option and choose how many receipts to show per page. All the way at the bottom here, you can also convert your invoice template to source only. So what that does is it actually converts the invoice template to XML. So I'll go ahead and convert one of these templates so we can see how that looks. It does require knowledge of XML programming, which is a combination of HTML and CSS, however. And just a word of warning, there is no going back. Once you convert an invoice template, you cannot convert it back to a standard BigTime template that you can edit this way. And this is what that looks like. So here you would be able to bold certain words. You can move around your columns, change the wording on your invoice, pretty much any customization using the existing BigTime fields. Okay, so looking back at the invoice here, let's go ahead and jump back to the invoicing overview. That was a T&M invoice. Now let's take a look at creating a fixed fee invoice. I'm just going to go ahead and hit create invoice up in the top left. Here you would then choose your client. Choose fixed fee. See each of our tasks that we have defined within the client. So let's just say we want to bill for tax prep and returns on this invoice. Right here, you can click the red triangle to change from milestone to percent complete. Let's just say we're billing percent complete, 50%. And the reason why it's blank there is because that task has been completely billed. So let's just do milestone here. So for audit, we've got $4,000 of prior billings. So this invoice automatically pre-populates with the rest of our budget. If you are including time and expense detail on your fixed fee invoice, and if you have your staffers logging time to these tasks, on the left-hand side, you can set a date range to drop time and expenses that fall outside of this date range back into the WIP. So for example, if we were only billing for time in April, we can choose April, and all of the time and expenses logged to this audit task from April will pull onto this invoice and be cleared from the WIP. And that's exactly what the checkboxes here on the left let you know. This first checkbox would be to clear the WIP for all the time and expenses logged to the tasks that you're invoicing for. And the second checkbox would be to create separate line items for any expenses that you're invoicing. Right here, you can choose to show tasks that have already been completed as well. Otherwise, only your uncompleted tasks will show before you finalize. And now we have a draft invoice. So let's take a look at one of our fixed fee templates here that I've created. So on this template, you can see each task, the total budget, what's remaining from that budget, the percent that you've billed, the percent that you're including on the given invoice, and the dollar amount that you've billed. To create this template, let's take a look at this one. I used this budget status section. So here you can choose how your tasks are displayed in this section, whether each task is broken out individually, or you're displaying your task group and then your task name. You have your hierarchy view, or just your task group alone if you don't want each of your individual task names displaying. Then below, you can choose to show your entire budget for each task, just the fee budget, just the expense budget, and also remaining total billings, prior billings, and current billings in dollars or percentages. Below here, you can choose to show archived tasks or hide them. You can choose to hide all unbilled tasks, which would only show tasks that you're currently billing for, if that is checked. You can choose to hide tasks that don't have budgets set up. And you can choose to show expense and other line items like discounts, for example. Okay, back to this invoice detail. Up in the top right, you can also print your invoice to a PDF and then choose the template here. You can do the same for a Word doc if you needed to make any manual changes to the invoice after printing. Clicking this cloud icon is how you can post your invoice to QuickBooks for AR purposes. So your bill to is where you would select the QuickBooks customer job that you want this invoice to post to. If your BigTime client or project is already linked, that will be pre-populated. Your AR account, and you'll also choose which line item this amount should hit in your chart of accounts, as well as your tax rate. You can also log a payment to the invoice as well. One note about payments: once an invoice is posted to QuickBooks, payments can no longer be managed in BigTime. So you do have to choose where you want to manage your payments. If you want to manage them in QuickBooks, then your workflow should be to create the invoice, post to QuickBooks, and manage the payments there. Then those payments will reflect back in BigTime for AR purposes. One note about that feature: looking at this QuickBooks integration settings menu, if you click into manage here, you do have to have this checkbox enabled to import QuickBooks payments in order for those payments to sync back into BigTime. And that box is unchecked by default. So you do have to go in here and manually check that box if you want those payments syncing back to BigTime. From here, you can also choose to post your invoices as to be printed, to be emailed. You can choose to use BigTime's billing address. And you can also set up a default AR account, a default service item, where your amounts will hit your QuickBooks chart of accounts for your invoices, and also a default expense item from your chart of accounts. So in our last release, we added a new invoicing type for item-based billing. Where this would come into play is if you had a client where you may have an invoice that includes time and expenses that are calculated at the T&M level, and also fixed amounts. So if we take a look at one of our clients here and take a look at our tasks that we have set up, clicking into this tax prep task and going to the accounting tab, here you can set what type of task this is in terms of item-based billing. So here I've selected time and materials, which is the default. So the total amount for this task in terms of invoicing will just calculate based on my billing rates that I have set up. Let's say, on the other hand, I have this audit task, though, where I don't want this to calculate based on billing rates. This is a fixed amount that I'm billing the client no matter what, no matter how many hours are logged to the task. So here I could choose either milestone billing or percent complete. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over to invoicing overview and click into the WIP here. And let's create an invoice for this client using the item-based billing feature. One note about this new option: this is also disabled by default. So in order to enable this feature, you do have to navigate to invoicing, configure, calculators, and turn on item-based billing. Fixed fee is also off by default. So if you're not seeing that option, this is where you can turn that on as well. I'll choose item-based billing here. And now you can see tax prep, consulting, and retainer are all fixed amounts, because those are calculated based on the billing rates that I've set up, whereas retainer is simply a retainer task for $5,000 each time we create an invoice for this client. Up top, you've got the percent complete task of audit that we just took a look at. And on the left-hand side, you've got the same options to set an invoice date range for your time and expenses, include an invoice note, clear the WIP for selected tasks, create separate line items for the expenses that you're invoicing, populate your line item notes with your notes from your tasks, and include only approved time and expenses. So definitely a useful feature if you do have clients where instead of having to create separate invoices for your fixed amounts and separate invoices for your T&M tasks, you can now combine those onto the same invoice. Okay, also in terms of reports, we do have a few pre-built invoicing reports that we can take a look at. So navigating to the report center, clicking into the invoicing tab here, we've got the AR aging report, invoice summary list, which will give you a list of all of your invoices for a given date range, and a couple of WIP reports. So you've got your summary of unbilled time and expense and your unbilled time and expense detail. So your summary will just give you total amounts, whereas your detail will give you the detail for each individual time and expense entry that's in your WIP. All right, so that about wraps up this invoicing webinar. Just want to thank everyone for attending. Brandon from our success team will be sending out a follow-up email that'll have a bunch of helpful links on invoicing. So if you do have any follow-up questions, that email will be super helpful. He'll also be sending out another email that'll have links to complete reviews as far as what you thought of the webinar and if you have any feedback. In that email, you'll also have a chance to receive a free Starbucks gift card on us in exchange for completing that review, so definitely keep an eye out for that. If you would be interested in receiving additional one-on-one training on invoicing or any other topic, you can reach out to your dedicated success rep in order to purchase a Success Point bundle. If you don't know who your assigned rep is, feel free to reach out to success@bigtime.net and we'll get you sorted out. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.